series of fall readings that MFA students and alumni are giving this fall. Our next reading will be in 2 weeks on Tuesday, October 13th at 4 o'clock, and Barbara Robideau and Callista Furtado will be reading in October, so we'll look forward to that. I also wanted to share some publicity about a book club that's starting at Moknak. We've started to get some emails about it, but would really encourage you to go. Their first meeting will be October 23rd. That's a Friday at noon, from noon to 1:30. And this will be at the Museum of Contemporary Native Arts downtown. And their first book that they'll be discussing is Blood Meridian by Cormac McCarthy. So keep that in mind too. So it's my pleasure today to introduce our two readers. Crisosto Apache is enrolled as a Mescalero Apache member from New Mexico. He is an alumnus of IAIA's MFA in Creative Writing program. He just graduated with the first class this past May. He has worked and published in numerous journals, and his work also includes Native LGBTQI, Two-Spirit advocacy, and public awareness. He will also be speaking at Santa Fe Community College in the next week on September 30th and October 1st in conjunction with the screening of the film Two Spirits. So plan to see him there as well. Ellen Fox will also be reading this afternoon. She's a first-year student in the MFA program here at IAIA, and she's a poet and is now expanding into literary nonfiction. Ellen has been a psychotherapist in Santa Fe since 1975 and has a specialty in assisting clients with obstacles and issues that may develop in their creative process. So thank you both for coming, and we're really looking forward to hearing your work this afternoon.
Yeah. I just want to thank the IAIA Library for allowing us to read and have this space to do our readings. And thank you all for showing up and participating. Tonight I'm going to read from a couple of collections that's sort of circulating right now that I'm in the process of seeking publication. This first poem I'm going to read is from a collection called Ghostweed, This Fool's Life. And it's sort of communicating or having conversations with a Japanese modernist classic writer from the 20s, Akutagawa Ryunosaki. And I've carried around this manuscript for over 25 years, trying to find a way to respond to it, and this is sort of what came out of it. And it's been in 2 years of working. So I'm going to just read one poem out of there because I'd like to focus more on my newer stuff later. I'm going to read you a poem from this collection called Corpse. And each poem in this collection has a quote in conversation with this his last manuscript. Quote, "He stared at the body," unquote, our Akutagawa. "There always has been a taboo towards handling the dead. Down a dim hallway, one afternoon, autumn, tucked away in a gray, soundless room, lays a woman toe-tagged with a small frame. She absorbs the table under a twinge light and blue cloth. The wedge in cavity whispers the act that somehow murder lessens the availability of consenting cadavers." So during my MFA program, while I was attending IAA, I generated a manuscript called Genesis, and Genesis is crossed through. And all the work in here is focused on memory, some kind of memory, historical memory, my personal memory, some type of memory. And so in a way, this is sort of my own emergent story, because I was trying to make sense of my own life, and so these are some of the poems that have come out of this piece. So the poem from this collection I'm going to read is called Whole X. Strobe light quickly chases tiny slow dust. Rainbow at close view in bright plexiglass. Reflect through fragments in a pinhole. Body lump and shadow limbs pour broad. Spray of color. Surface swell, surfs forgotten. Water droplets somewhere else in the room. Crystalline specks move slightly, passing inside that eloquent separate film. Floating insignias settle around peepholes where spectators kneel. Split moment places intermittent screen strobes. Light fills glottal face, oxidizing remittent lust. Silver, red, green, blue, and purple hues illumine naked eyes. Relative bodies inhabit glimmer shots in full penetration by rubber shades of failing, brilliant salvation against blinking LED nodes. I gradually rub back inside that lurking place. I slowly noose inside the black partition cutout. I deliberately park behind complacent spit stops, behind light slivers and pelvic thrust rehearsals, under creaky vinyl flaps, swinging double doors, back and forth, back and forth. Illumination on black lacquer walls, X. Crosshair twinge, pornographic lament, X. Flash nodule, fumbling light, X. So oddly enough, in this collection, a lot of I've sort of followed this pattern of the Big Dipper as we know it in Western culture, but in my language it's Nakos. There's a phase in which throughout the year that it follows, and a lot of the poems in this sort of follow that phase, and it sort of follows like this idea that of the 9 months I was when my mother was carrying me. So that's where I really got the idea of this collection, Genesis. But my most recent work is called Swift Cinder. So I'm going to read a segment of this poem. And it's a stream of consciousness poem that I'm sort of thinking that it's a memorialization. About a year ago, I lost my younger brother in a car accident. And I'm not sure that I've quite dealt with that, so I think my only way of really dealing with that and coming to some acceptance of that is to write about it. So this poem, I've read some over the course of the MFA program, but this is sort of new stuff, aside from what I've read before. I've also archived a lot of my brother's work, and that's probably going to be the hardest part in how to weave that without taking away from his intentions. So that's part of what this whole collection is about. So this is a segment of Swift Cinder, about midway through the poem. Inside this cricket house, into night, our body lies awake. Cricket songs assemble against a judder of paper wings. When moth wing dust disperses, like vibrations procures a lure into soaring death flight, twirling center light, ambient background wavers, ascent into night, our bodies lies, awake atop flagstones. Cricket songs assemble, scratching their paper wings, and chirping into desert clefts. We both gather in our beds. They stay to rub, some hiss, some strike sparingly, or fists gather in masses. Sand covers arid slabs. Water is all around and slithers as old sediments. A crisscross tinder fist marks intersections. White lines pass back and forth, through and over, then white Then the white bear comes charging, breaking through brush and thicket, musters old dirt into heaves of glass, sprays sinew inside wrists and joints, divulges over our torrid air mass. Empty these demarcate calculations. 473-80. Relatives afar in skeletal trailer houses can see our saunter. His small hands clench mine. There is no rainfall. Suckling the half-empty bottle of apple juice, over rocks and sand, the hum of power lines tremble, leading us across into the dusty land of Canaan. 481-88. Lights flicker at a gas station in Rio Puerco. Night insects swirl in 8mm film trails. Erect in makeshift glass ice case, a polar bear watches over us. From a distance they enter a bar. Late into the evening, a few hundred yards away, our eyes leave the stare of a white bear who oscillates loudly over the building. 489-96. A few drinks in a condo just off the roadway, just off the reservation. In the mountains, long into a docile night, we drank, just the two of us. Turmoil courses through our veins, a rage inside rivers, a slippage of rocks and boulders, a rev of engine, a scale of headlamp, a glare of vague human lumbers in a driveway. We could hear explain display of web oxidizing the windshield. 497-04. Early morning, a crack through trees wake a lingering ghost. It usurps into a misty tree line. Silent, we rise from our bed. A quarter-mile down the road, firefighters pry his body. A brisk morning calls the ghostly finger to pinch his aorta. His body suspends a mangled wreck, inanimate towards Albuquerque. 405-12. He returns after 20 years in a black Chrysler 300. It had deep window tints, a shiny row of crow eyes. He drives the hell out of that car. 413-14. One long tire skid mark, burns tar, scorches earth, metal mesh with polymer, blood vaporizes. No amount of liquid can extinguish the slow scald. But through boughs, a forest is still a forest, just as a door is still a door. Through a forest, exits or enters this child. In it, from swinging hinge, cross the threshold, this child, small and grim, finds solace among the boughs. A gray hawk in flight, the sedge wren does scatter, leaving one feather in a tether as a falling leaf. Pass over lower jawbone through esophageal aqueduct, tiny surfeit saliva discharge, detonates fireflies. Every collapse of breath surpasses a slither of arid forest wind. Sepal septet mortar sings, as mute clay expels morsel lips, hastens exonerate bars that trudge pacing meadows just before expiry, leaves in hidden grove a smudge of severed branches. Light moves into diamond spackle, that shimmer layers about our eyes, immersed down into the cradle valley inside a cluster of naked words, reassuring daybreak. Is still coming. The Sandia Mountains steeple behind, a cascade prediction of early bruised bluish light. Ascend from the valley below, naked words plucked a floating mimic muddle of its silt river. River sounds phonic carcass mass with new tongues. We left ourselves behind. Let's call one birth water. let's call the other firestorm. We left them behind, just as we were left behind, somewhere between bones of recession and a gullet of inflation, stimulating crane clusters, where words chose us, when we lay still, motionless, inside our helpless state. You said to me, under whispers of blowing sand, under whispers of two foolish boys, walking the tight shadow of electric power lines, electric in our need to wander the outskirts of limestone and the western Tularosa Basin plateaus, trying desperately to find a homestead away from death's small grip. We here are walking, no stagger, again in bewildering path that leads us both to the same pile of ash. A pile of ash that will immensely fluster. Here are all the angles that fasten to one path or another. Here is the screw impaling itself beside the roof. Here is the unreachable us who flail heavenly about. Here is the path that rips through the back of this child. Here are the small piles of ash hidden to count when eluding the fury man who accompanies dried shells threading on string by coral sinking in manure. Here is the fool of a brother whimpering into fingers on a bed full of fleeting words, coral and turquoise. Here inside the pages, coral and turquoise, shedding dust, turning our eyes into red jewel branches. I crawl the tall sunflowers where the ground is ardent in the same way of baptism, in a cross-hatched lament, and the arduous end of hollow rods is in envious company of a false father, influence under a waste of trees, wasted by a douse of lies, left under palms for decades, left as welts, forlorn dusk, planks for ill-fitted studs, turning the hinge, over which your casket remains an array at the moment of your lumber. Execution of carcinogen, dust slithers over, someplace binding its fang tracks in pebbles and sand. We are still too arid to sprawl, too arid to wheeze, as if I could stoop in a burrow fusillade with roots of plants we cannot modify. Beneath a brush, a couple of hister beetles dig together through the next world, where no other we sense crackles of decay for fertile memory we grimace. But we still crouch below. Maybe the entire basin squanders or wastes. Maybe the older beetle digresses without progressing towards this vast outstretch all over the Tularosa Basin. Or how a bird cannot see those blackening specks against the pebbles beneath it, but keeps soaring until its wings tire, while the beetle eases lucidly outside their stranger air. As we both think this, some roads we don't run leave tracks. In the slinking dust, we both want to mimic them and see nothing, the way a skink speeds through arroyos, not seeing the belly of birds. Water rises and gushes, and it means everything will wash. We both want to be fistulous, a vein or a vessel of powder impaling particles into shard. We both want to be beneath the dissolve back into that sludge of birth and reform the urge of a bottle grip so we can both run. While we both sweat, walking in a blustering trail, suddenly many granules among us in a white bloom, streams fast towards white sands. Among the immense cloud clogging white, we both stream in its seratim, never breathing in, forlorn and against ribs. A fist sprays a bouquet inside bone gullies. We both strain against bruises. It, while thickening inside mother, father, brother ties, grafts from skins, the cells that harden along and centric, a threatening impact sense, all the fists disrupt, us both who keep the pace in forlorn. In forlorn, a bruise that spreads, that strains, and eases like bones, like plain bones that decay and leans against the ribs. The nature of our face pressing up against the glass, flat as an opaque doll face, lucid in the moon glow. Who will say we are the pale face, lost inside a loose box, a box placed on a gray shelf for that eternity, which will never come. Our faces press up against the glass, round and distorted, inside an everlasting smile. Who will say we are the pinhole that allows dust to vacate through vesicles unseen, unseen by our opaque eye? Who will say our face distorts as it presses against the lucid moon never coming, against the everlasting smile behind it? Quote, the sigh not seen, but let them go, and be you blithe and bonny, converting all your sounds of woe into hey noni noni. Sing no more ditties, no, sing no more of bumps so dull and heavy. Unquote. Shakespeare, Much Ado About Nothing. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for coming, especially